Thank you. I was moving into my new apartment and didn't have much furniture yet. Money was tight as a new college grad, so I browsed Craigslist hoping to find some free or cheap secondhand stuff. I came across an ad for a full living room set being given away for free: a couch, love seat, coffee table, and TV stand. The ad said the owner was moving suddenly out of state for a new job and needed to get rid of the furniture quickly. This seemed too good to be true, but worth checking out. I emailed the seller and arranged a time to come take a look. When I arrived at the apartment, I was thrilled to see the furniture was even better than described: barely used, name brand pieces in great condition. The seller, a man about my age, said he was leaving the next morning and just needed it all gone as soon as possible. We started loading the furniture into my SUV and were making quick work of it. As we strapped the last love seat in place, I heard angry yelling coming from the building entrance. A woman stormed up to us, screaming that the furniture was hers and she wanted it back immediately. She accused the man of stealing it from her apartment while she was at work. He tried denying it, but she wasn't having any of it. I was completely blindsided, caught in the middle of a situation I wanted no part of. The woman turned her anger towards me, assuming I must be on the scam. I tried explaining I had simply answered the Craigslist ad in good faith. The man insisted he was a rightful owner. Their screaming match was attracting a crowd of gawkers. I kept waiting for one of them to call the police. The woman threatened to take photos of my license plate and report me to the authorities. The man begged her to let me have the furniture, since he was leaving town anyway. Their arguing just escalated, both convinced they were in the right. I stood there paralyzed, keys in hand, wondering whether I should just make a run for it or try to defuse the situation. Part of me wanted to unload the furniture right there on the street, but it seemed too risky with the woman so heated. For all I knew, the story about her being the rightful owner could be true. As their voices reached a fever pitch, I slipped into the driver's seat, hoping I could quietly pull away unnoticed. But before I could even start the engine, the woman was at my window, blocking me from closing the door. She demanded I give her my contact information, or she would call the police immediately. I hesitantly scribbled my name and number on an old receipt, though I knew I should have refused. She snatched it angrily, vowing I hadn't heard the last from her. As she stepped away, I saw my chance and peeled out, leaving the warring strangers behind me. My adrenaline was pumping as I sped away, checking my mirrors to make sure I wasn't being followed. I kept replaying the whole bizarre scene in my head, wondering how I managed to get stuck in the middle of their dispute. Maybe I should have been warier of such a good deal on Craigslist, but I never could have predicted that dramatic confrontation. I debated what to do next: try selling the furniture to recoup my losses, or just abandon it altogether. The woman had my contact info, and I worried about the police coming after me. I decided storing it at my parents' house was the safest option until I figured things out. I've avoided Craigslist ever since, too anxious of repeating that nightmare. Now I only buy furniture from reputable stores, even if it means paying more. Nothing is worth that trauma of being caught up in a screaming match with strangers in a parking lot. I learned my lesson. If an online deal seems too good to be true, it always is. I'm just thankful I made it out of that situation unscathed, with a wild story to tell my friends over beers. But I'll never forget that fateful day I responded to the Craigslist ad from hell. In the days following the incident, I was on edge, constantly checking my phone and looking over my shoulder for any signs of trouble. I kept expecting an angry voicemail or a knock at my door from either the scorned woman or police. Maybe she did report me, but nothing ever came of it. I avoided going out unless necessary, worried I'd run into her around town. I even considered giving the furniture away just to wash my hands of the whole mess. But having just furnished my entire place for free, it seemed foolish to give it up now. The moral ambiguity gnawed at me, though. What if this really was all stolen? Could I live with furniture obtained through deception? My parents were appalled when I told them the story. They scolded me for getting mixed up in something so shady. But ultimately we decided keeping the furniture tucked away in their basement was the safest plan. At least until the statute of limitations expired. Weeks went by without incident before my paranoia finally began subsiding. The woman never contacted me again or made any legal threats. I stopped obsessing over the bizarre encounter every waking minute. Perhaps she realized pursuing me further wasn't worth the effort. By the following month, I finally worked up the courage to retrieve the furniture from my parents' house. I rented a U-Haul and moved it all into my apartment. Having it around was a haunting reminder at first, but eventually it just blended into the background. Now, years later, I can look back on the whole crazy ordeal and shake my head. I chalk it up as a cautionary tale about being too trusting with online transactions, but also proof that sticking to your guns can work out in the end. While I don't recommend others follow my risky lead, sometimes you have to trust your instinct in murky situations. And never underestimate how far people will go for a quality couch, even one of questionable origins. I was moving across the country for a new job and needed to sell some furniture quick before the move. I posted an ad on Craigslist for a barely used tan leather couch I had purchased last year. Within an hour of the post going up, I received a text from a potential buyer named Sam asking if the couch was still available. Sam said he desperately needed a new couch because his old one had bed bugs. He asked if he could come see it that evening. I was surprised anyone would act so urgently over a couch, but I agreed to meet him at my apartment. When Sam arrived, I immediately felt unsettled. He was fidgety and sweaty, his eyes darting around nervously. As soon as he saw the couch, he let out an audible sigh of relief and said, "I'll take it." He didn't even sit on it or examine it further. When I told him the price, he quickly pulled out a wad of cash from his pocket and counted it out without hesitation. He kept mumbling about how he needed to get rid of the bedbugs right away. His bizarre behavior made me uncomfortable, but he paid full price, so I let it go. Sam asked for help carrying the couch downstairs to his old beat-up van. As we loaded it in, he started telling me how the bedbugs had ruined his life, how he couldn't sleep or have company over without getting eaten alive. I started to wonder if selling him the couch was a mistake, but the cash was already in my hand. I just wanted him gone as quickly as possible. After Sam drove off with the couch, I thought I was done with him. But later that night, my phone pinged with a text from him. He said the couch cushions were lumpy and I had scammed him. He demanded a full refund. I calmly explained that he had inspected the couch beforehand and that all sales were final. But Sam kept texting, each time getting more aggressive. He said he had trouble sleeping because the lumps aggravated his back. He threatened to sue me for selling him a defective couch. The harassment continued over the next few days. Sam texted me constantly, always with new complaints about the couch and demands for his money back. He claimed the leather was torn, it wasn't, and the cushions were filled with rocks, they weren't. No matter how reasonably I responded, he wouldn't leave me alone. His texts became so frequent and threatening that I eventually blocked his number. A few days went by without any contact from Sam, and I thought maybe he had finally moved on. But then one afternoon, I heard a loud banging on my apartment door. When I opened it, there was Sam right in front of me screaming about his money. I quickly shut the door in his face, and he finally left after making a huge scene for the neighbors. Over the next week, I started noticing strange occurrences that made me believe Sam was stalking me. I saw his van parked outside my building late at night. I noticed a car tailing me closely during my commute one morning. It was Sam. He somehow found out where I worked and began lurking around outside my office. He even confronted me in the parking garage, threatening to take me to court for everything I had. I worry what Sam might do next in his crazed quest for a refund. I asked security at my office to look out for him. I also filed a police report about the stalking. But Sam's harassment didn't stop. He somehow got my new cell number and continued texting me enraged messages. I learned an important lesson through all this: be very careful who you agree to meet from Craigslist. You never know if a seemingly normal buyer may turn into an unstable harasser. I should have trusted my gut when I first met Sam that something was off about him. Now I have to constantly look over my shoulder until I moved away and hopefully escaped him for good. I'll never make the mistake of selling anything on Craigslist again. The harassment from Sam went on for weeks. The threatening texts, the stalking, the angry voicemails, it was a nightmare. I tried everything to get him to leave me alone. I told him to stop contacting me. I threatened to go to the police. I even tried reasoning with him calmly. But nothing worked. Sam was obsessed with getting his money back for the couch, even though he had inspected it and agreed to the sale. The fearful looking over my shoulder became part of my daily routine. I varied my route to work each day, trying to shake any sign of Sam following me. At work, I asked security to escort me in my car every night. The security guards got used to keeping an eye out for Sam lurking around the building after I showed them his photo once. At home, I made sure to lock all my doors and windows. I shut all the blinds and curtains tight, but I still didn't feel safe. I could imagine Sam trying to break in to demand his money back. I barely slept wondering if I'd hear him banging on the door again. The police took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do unless Sam directly threatened me. I even considered moving, but I didn't have the time or money to break my lease right before my cross-country move. I was stuck living in fear until I left town. Just a week before my move, the stalking and harassment stopped suddenly. Sam's calls and texts completely ceased. I hesitated to believe it at first, still glancing over my shoulder constantly even after days went by quietly. But as I finished packing up for my move, it seemed Sam had maybe given up at last. I decided to do one final check the night before I left town. I drove slowly past Sam's house just to see if his van was there. It wasn't. I felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. Sam had tormented me for weeks over that Craigslist couch, but I was finally free of him. I drove straight home and slept peacefully, knowing I would soon be far, far away from Sam. The next morning, I loaded up my moving truck quickly. As I did a final walkthrough of my empty apartment, my phone dinged. My whole body tensed up in fear. Was it him again? But it was just a message from the building manager reminding me to leave my keys. I took a deep breath and laughed at myself for being so jittery. Sam was gone for good. I took one last look around, turned in my keys, and headed off to my new life free of fear. Selling old furniture on Craigslist always makes me nervous, but it's an easy way to get rid of stuff I don't need anymore. When I decided to sell my antique desk that I inherited from my grandmother, I figured I'd give Craigslist a try before hauling it to the donation center. I posted the ad and within a few hours got a response from a man named Tom. He said he was looking for an antique desk for his home office and mine looked perfect. We arranged a time for him to come take a look, and he showed up right on schedule. Tom was polite and friendly, complimenting the great condition of the desk and saying it would look fantastic in his office. We settled on a price, he loaded it into his truck, and handed me the cash. As he got back into his truck, he smiled and told me to have a great rest of my day. Overall, it was one of the smoothest Craigslist transactions I ever had. A few hours later, I got a text from an unknown number thanking me again for the desk. I assumed it was Tom and texted back a quick "You're welcome." Then he responded suggesting we should get coffee sometime and get to know each other since we were both antique lovers. I politely declined, explaining I was busy and preferred to keep my Craigslist transactions purely professional. He responded immediately, apologizing for being too forward, and said he just thought we would have a lot in common. I didn't respond, hoping he would get the hint. But the texts kept coming every few hours, with him asking how my day was going and telling me more about his interests, trying to find common ground between us. I started to get a bad feeling about the whole thing, so I stopped responding altogether. But the next day he texted again, saying he missed our conversation and hoped I was doing okay. At this point, I was thoroughly creeped out, so I decided to block his number. I figured that would be the end of it. But a few days later, my phone rang from an unknown number again. When I answered, it was Tom, claiming he was just checking in. He acted offended that I had blocked him and said he thought we were having nice conversations. I told him firmly that I wasn't interested in talking anymore and hung up. Over the next week, he proceeded to call me from different numbers several times a day, leaving voicemails asking why I was ignoring him. He even showed up at my door one night, claiming he had been in the neighborhood and wanted to say hello. I was home alone and terrified, so I hid in the house and waited for him to go away. The final straw was when I left to walk my dog one evening and noticed a strange car parked across the street from my house. Tom was sitting inside, just watching my front door. When he saw me, he quickly sped off. I immediately called the police to file a report. The officer I spoke with was very understanding and said he would send a patrol car to keep an eye on my house. He also helped me file for a restraining order against Tom. I never heard from Tom again after the police got involved, but the experience shook me badly. It was chilling how quickly a normal transaction turned into weeks of harassment from someone I barely knew. I learned the hard way to be very cautious when selling anything online. You truly never know who might be on the other end of a friendly conversation. I'm just grateful I trusted my instincts before things escalated. Now, I only sell smaller items locally and avoid personalized interactions. Staying safe has to be the priority, even if it means missing out on some sales. At least I can rest easy in my home again. Looking back, there were a few red flags I should have noticed earlier. When Tom first expressed interest in the desk, he asked a lot of personal questions about me and my home life. At the time, I thought he was just being friendly. But those overly personal questions should have been a sign that his interest went beyond just the furniture. I also should have been more firm from the start in declining his attempts to get coffee or further conversation. As soon as he asked to meet up outside of the transaction, I would try to shut him down completely instead of politely deflecting. My indirect responses probably gave him hope that I could be persuaded. Finally, I never should have engaged with the texts or calls as long as I did. Once it was clear he didn't respect my boundaries, I should have blocked him right away instead of responding or trying to reason with him. Engaging it all likely just encouraged him to continue contacting me. While nothing can excuse his frightening behavior, looking back on it, there are things I could have done to protect myself sooner. Trusting instincts and setting firm boundaries quickly are so important when dealing with strangers. This chilling experience taught me to be much more cautious in the future when interacting with potential buyers. Selling the desk was meant to be a quick and simple way to declutter, but instead it opened the door to weeks of fear and anxiety. I felt so violated to have a complete stranger showing up at my home uninvited and essentially stalking me. For a while, I hardly felt safe in my own house. The police were a huge help in ensuring my safety, but the emotional toll of feeling harassed took longer to recover from. I found myself second-guessing all my online interactions and feeling panicked whenever I heard from an unknown number. It shakes your sense of security when boundaries are crossed that brazenly. With time, therapy, and lots of self-care, I've been able to move forward. But I'll never forget that chilling feeling of seeing Tom park outside my home, watching me. It serves as an important reminder to listen to my instincts and value my safety over being polite. As unsettling as it was, I'm grateful I can now use the experience to help others stay alert and assertive when encountering similar red flags. I was really struggling to make ends meet, so I decided to browse Craigslist for some odd jobs to earn a little extra cash. I came across an ad seeking a babysitter for a single dad with two young kids. He said he needed someone a few evenings a week while he was at work. The pay wasn't great, but it was better than nothing. We exchanged a few emails and talked on the phone to go over details. He seemed nice enough, if maybe a little impatient and short with me, but I figured he was just busy. We'd agreed on $10 an hour, which was less than I usually make babysitting, but his kids were older, so I thought it wouldn't be too much work. The first night I went over there, the kids seemed fine. They mostly just played video games while I supervised and ordered pizza for dinner. The dad got home around 10 p.m., thanked me curtly, and said he'd send the payment via Venmo. I waited a couple days, but the payment never came. I emailed him asking politely about it, and he apologized, claiming he'd totally forgotten and would send it as soon as. Another few days went by and still nothing. At this point, I was getting frustrated. I really needed that cash. When I called him, he gave me a sob story about how money was tight and he had unexpected expenses. He swore he would pay me by the end of the week. I begrudgingly agreed to come babysit again in the meantime. Over the next couple weeks, this pattern continued. He always had an excuse for why he couldn't pay, but promised it was coming soon. I kept babysitting, feeling increasingly desperate for the income. His kids weren't bad, but they stayed up late playing video games no matter how much I encouraged them to get to bed early. One night, the dad didn't get home until after midnight. I could tell he had been drinking. I asked again when I could expect payment, as 3 weeks of babysitting had gone unpaid. He got angry, accusing me of harassing him and not being understanding of his financial situation. I was stunned and hurt by his aggressive reaction. I explained calmly that I had bills to pay too, and had been very patient thus far. But I needed the agreed-upon pay for the hours I had worked. He scoffed, bloodshot eyes narrowing, and told me if I needed money so badly, maybe I should find another job. Just disgusting and demeaning. I grabbed my coat and left without another word, holding back tears of frustration. Days went by without any communication from him, despite my efforts to call and email. By this point, I knew he had scammed me. I was never going to see a dime. It made me sick to think of how I had wasted all those hours for nothing. Not to mention the gas money driving to his house multiple times a week. I tried looking up his name online to see if I could find any more contact info or personal details about him. But he had a pretty common name and I didn't have much else to go on. I felt powerless and taken advantage of. In a desperate last-ditch attempt, I drove by his house one afternoon when I figured the kids would be at school and he'd be at work. There was no car in the driveway, so I left a firmly worded note on the door demanding payment and saying I would not hesitate to take legal action. But days passed and my note clearly went ignored. He knew what he was doing all along, luring in a cash-strapped student with the promise of pay for odd jobs. I had been tricked by a master scammer and now had no recourse. I learned the hard way to be more cautious with Craigslist odd jobs. Get payment up front whenever possible, and don't let people take advantage of you or shame you when asking to be fairly compensated for your services. I tried contacting him one last time saying I would take legal action if he didn't pay up, but I never heard back. In hindsight, there were some red flags from the beginning that he was going to flake on payment, but I was in such a desperate financial spot that I overlooked them, wanting to believe the best in someone. This experience left me feeling used, frustrated, and incredibly insecure about how I was going to pay my bills. I wish I had trusted my gut feeling when he first seemed unwilling to provide upfront payment. Don't make the same mistake I did. With Craigslist gigs, always get some form of payment before providing a service. Scammers prey on the vulnerable. We have to look out for ourselves. I learned to stand firm and walk away if something seems off. Your time and effort have value. Don't let people take that for granted. My Craigslist horror story still makes my blood boil, but also taught me to be stronger and more street smart in the future. Don't let people take advantage of your generosity. I felt so foolish, driving all over town to babysit for this jerk for weeks with nothing to show for it. And now I was behind on my own bills with no way to make up the lost wages. It was a tough lesson at a time when I could least afford it, but it motivated me to advocate for myself and not be afraid to speak up when I'm being taken for granted. I also research potential clients more thoroughly now instead of jumping at any opportunity without vetting it first. As a broke college student, I thought I didn't have the luxury of turning down any paid work that came my way, but being selective and trusting my instincts could have prevented me from being manipulated and scammed. We have to watch out for ourselves because scammers are counting on people being too polite or desperate to push back on sketchy situations. Don't let people shame you for asking to be paid fairly. That's their tactic to take advantage of kind-hearted folks who want to avoid conflict. If only I had stood firm right from the beginning instead of giving him the benefit of the doubt week after week. But all I can do now is learn from the painful ordeal and be smarter if another opportunity arises. My Craigslist horror story serves as a cautionary tale as well as a lesson in self-advocacy. No more free rides or blind trust from here on out. Looking back, I can't believe I fell for such an obvious scam. At the time, the rental listing seemed too good to be true, a spacious two-bedroom apartment in the trendiest neighborhood of the city, for hundreds of dollars below market rate. I should have known something was up, but the photos looked legitimate and the landlord Lisa seemed nice over email. She told me there was lots of interest, so I'd need to put down a deposit fast to hold it. I was so excited about the place that I didn't do my due diligence and sent over the $500 deposit right away. Lisa thanked me for the deposit and said she'd be in touch in a few days to arrange signing the lease. Those few days passed and I heard nothing. I emailed and called several times but got no response. That's when a sinking feeling started to set in that this might not be on the up and up. Still, part of me clung to hope that there was just a miscommunication. After a week of unreturned messages, I decided to drive over to the address listed on the ad. As I pulled up, my last bits of hope were crushed. It was just a random apartment building, not the charming brownstone in the photos. I went inside and asked the manager if they knew of any Lisa that managed units there. Of course, there was no record of her. At that point, I knew for sure it was a scam. I felt like such an idiot for being duped. $500 wasn't a small amount of money for me at the time, and I had just handed it over no questions asked to a complete stranger. Beyond the financial aspect, I started to worry about all the personal information I had given Lisa. Foolishly, I provided everything to fill out a supposed rental application. My full name, date of birth, employer details, previous rental history, even my social security number. Who knows what this scammer would do with that info? Identity theft. Opening credit cards in my name. The possibilities were terrifying. I went home and started doing everything I could think of to prevent becoming victimized further. I called my bank to let them know what happened in case there was any suspicious activity on my accounts. I also signed up for identity theft monitoring and froze my credit reports. My next call was to the police to file a report, which they informed me unfortunately wouldn't lead to recovering my lost money, but would create a paper trail in case my identity was misused later. The whole ordeal left me shaken and paranoid. For months, I was anxiously checking my credit reports and account balances daily, worried this faceless scammer would reappear at any moment to wreak havoc in my life. Thankfully, they never did, at least as far as I know. I was more fortunate than some who've lost their entire life savings or had their identities stolen for years before realizing. Still, I learned my lesson the hard way. I never rent sight unseen now or provide sensitive information without vetting first. When I see unbelievable deals on sites like Craigslist, I'm much more skeptical, realizing the old adage is true. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. I'm just grateful I got away with only losing some money rather than having my entire identity hijacked. Now I try to share my cautionary tale so others don't make the same mistakes. While there are deals to be found online, you have to protect yourself, do your research, and trust your instincts. If something seems fishy, it probably is. Don't let the prospect of finding the perfect apartment blind you to obvious red flags. Stay vigilant and remember that anyone can pretend to be someone else from behind a computer screen. The weeks following the realization I had been scammed were incredibly stressful. I was constantly on edge, worried each day would bring some new disaster from the hands of this faceless criminal who now had all my personal details. Every unexpected call or piece of mail set my heart racing, certain it was the notification I dreaded of fraudulent activity come to wreak havoc. I started obsessively checking all my accounts multiple times a day. My credit reports were pulled up at least weekly, examining each line item for any unfamiliar transactions. I enabled every fraud alert possible, wanting to be notified immediately if so much as $1 was spent without my authorization. I knew I couldn't undo the mistake of handing over my information. All I could do was try to contain the damage before it spiraled out of control. My paranoid vigilance started spilling over into all areas of my life. I stopped trusting even innocuous interactions, wondering what ulterior motives were at play. At work, I hesitated before sharing basic professional details, irrationally worried a wrong turn could send them into the hands of some unseen criminal network. Casual conversations took on an interrogative tone as I probed for red flags of deceit. The optimism and easy openness I previously moved through life with had been rattled, leaving guarded distrust in its wake. Looking back now, the lack of any real damaging activity makes my overreactions seem excessive. However, in those uncertain early days following the scam, it felt like the sword of Damocles hanging ominously over my head. I knew I was powerless to stop whatever grand act of identity theft the scammer had planned. All I could do was watch and wait for the other shoe to drop. Gradually, the months passed without incident, and my vigilance shifted from a panicked flurry to a more reasoned caution. I still diligently monitor my credit and accounts, but I no longer feel ceaseless dread behind each action. The scam's lesson is now represented as an unfortunate tuition paid in exchange for learning to protect myself in the modern world. I use my experience to advise others on safely navigating the internet's endless traps and pitfalls. Look deeply into tempting offers, verify identities, and never send money or details to those you don't know. My mistake provided hard-won knowledge I can now pass on so perhaps others can avoid this costly crash course on cons in the digital age. In the end, while I lost some money and peace of mind, I escaped largely unscathed. The glass half full view is that it could have been so much worse. Some had entire financial lives destroyed or good names ruined from identity theft. Though the experience rattled me for a time, I was fortunate enough to avoid true catastrophe. I now focus on appreciation for what wasn't taken instead of anger for what was. The path forward is being smarter and safer while helping others do the same. The scammers rely on trust, but informed caution can protect from their deceitful traps. My hard-learned lesson makes me more wary, but I try not to let fear blind me to the good still waiting to be found. Moving forward with open eyes, protecting myself, helping others, that is the only viable path. I had just moved to a new city and was looking to furnish my apartment on the cheap. Browsing Craigslist, I came across a listing for a beautiful antique desk for only $50. The grain on the wood looked amazing in the photo, and the seller said it was an antique passed down in her family. I quickly emailed expressing interest. The seller, who called herself Anne, responded right away and said I could come take a look at the desk that evening. She gave me an address that seemed to be in a pretty remote area outside the city limits. I thought that was a little odd, but figured she probably had a large house with space for furniture. We agreed to meet at 8 p.m. when she was finished with work. I plugged the address into my GPS and headed out a little before 8 to make sure I wasn't late. The neighborhood was very rural, and I didn't pass any other cars. It was also an extremely cloudy night, so it was nearly pitch black on the winding wooded roads. As I pulled up to the address, I realized it wasn't a house at all, but an empty dirt parking lot next to some warehouses that looked deserted. There were no lights anywhere, and my headlights only illuminated a small patch of gravel and weeds. This definitely seemed sketchy, but I convinced myself Anne probably worked at one of the warehouses and this was just a meeting spot. I parked and sent Anne a text that I had arrived. The parking lot was eerily quiet except for the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees behind me. After about 10 minutes with no response, I started having a bad feeling about the whole thing. I hesitated getting out of my car, wondering if Anne was even going to show up or if I had been duped. Just then, I noticed headlights approaching from the road. A large pickup truck drove slowly into the parking lot, the driver's face obscured by darkness. Instead of parking, the truck continued creeping across the lot with its high beams shining directly at my car, blinding me. I couldn't tell if the truck belonged to Anne or someone else entirely. My pulse quickened and I knew I needed to get out of there. Just as I went to put my car in reverse, the truck stopped abruptly about 20 feet behind me, engine idling. I watched in the rearview mirror as the driver's side door opened, but no one emerged. The headlights continued glaring behind me, obscuring any view of who was in the truck. I froze, afraid to move, as my mind raced with frightening possibilities about who this could be and what weapons they may have. Breaking out in a sweat, I realized I needed to act now if I was going to get away safely. In one swift motion, I slammed the car into reverse, stomped on the gas pedal, and spun the wheel hard, sending gravel flying as I fishtailed out of the parking spot. The truck's engine roared as it lurched forward, closing in on my bumper. I shifted into drive and hit the gas, speeding out of the parking lot and onto the dark road, my pulse pounding in my ears. I blazed down the country road as fast as I dared, blowing through stop signs, just wanting to get back to the safety of the city. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I compulsively checked the rear view mirror, terrified the truck would reappear behind me. But the road remained empty all the way back to the brighter streets of downtown, where I finally felt brave enough to slow down. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to calm down from the terror of what almost happened back on that deserted road. How could I have been so stupid, driving alone at night into the middle of nowhere to meet a stranger? Anything could have happened to me out there, and no one would have heard or seen a thing. I started to wonder if Anne was even a real person. It dawned on me that I could very well have been lured there on purpose, the fake ad being used to get me alone and vulnerable. My hands shook as I drove, images of what might have happened flashing through my mind. That truck driver could have rammed my car, forcing me off the road into the ditch. He could have jumped out and dragged me from my car or blocked me in the parking spot so I couldn't escape. Visions of being kidnapped, assaulted, even murdered filled my head. I shuddered imagining my body left decomposing in the woods, just another missing person never to be found. By the time I made it back to the city limits, tears of panic were streaming down my face. I pulled into a drugstore parking lot to try to collect myself. Under the bright fluorescent lights, I started to feel a little safer, but I couldn't stop replaying those terrifying moments of being hunted in the dark. My pulse continued to race as I sat in the idling car, thinking about how close I'd come to real danger back on that shadowy road. After about 20 minutes, I managed to calm down enough to drive the rest of the way home. But I still felt jumpy, constantly checking the locks and peering out the windows into the night. I kept imagining I was being followed or that someone was lurking right outside in the shadows. I eventually made it home, triple-checked that all my doors were locked, and tried unsuccessfully to sleep. Every little noise from outside made me jump as I lay in bed replaying the parking lot scene over and over in my mind. I realized how extremely lucky I was to have made it out of there safely. My hands didn't stop shaking until sunrise. Morning light finally allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief, but I couldn't shake the lingering unease and anxiety that followed me throughout the day. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the pickup truck to come roaring up behind me at any moment. For days afterwards, I avoided going out alone, especially at night. I felt constantly on edge, like danger was lurking right around every corner. After that harrowing experience, I vowed to never again take risks meeting strangers from the internet in isolated places. Anything I need can be bought at the store or done without. My life is worth more than a good deal on Craigslist. We hear too many scary stories of lures and kidnappings to ignore the dangers. I consider myself blessed to have escaped unharmed. But I worry about those who haven't been so lucky. My horror story easily could have ended in tragedy. I was in a tight spot financially after losing my full-time job as a copywriter last month. My savings were running low and I needed income while I continued searching for a new position. Out of desperation, I turned to Craigslist, browsing the gig section for any freelance writing opportunities. Most of the ads seemed sketchy, vague descriptions promising quick cash or easy money. But one post stood out. It was from a woman named Jennifer who needed blog posts and web content written for her small business website. The pay she offered was higher than average, around $50 per 500 words. Jennifer's initial email was professional, detailing the topics she needed covered and providing clear instructions. After exchanging a few emails back and forth, I felt comfortable taking the job. The first week went smoothly. I submitted 2 articles on topics Jennifer specified, like eco-friendly packaging materials and marketing to millennials. She replied praising my work and sent $200 via PayPal as promised. But things started to take an odd turn in the second week. Jennifer asked for my full name, address, and date of birth, supposedly for tax purposes, before sending payments. I hesitated, but provided the information, not wanting to lose this crucial source of income. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer started making more strange requests, like asking for my social security number, driver's license, and even my mother's maiden name. When I pushed back, she insisted it was all necessary for her record keeping. I reluctantly gave in against my better judgment. By the 5th week, Jennifer stopped discussing writing assignments altogether and would only ask invasive personal questions over email. How much was my rent? When would I next be traveling out of town? She always had an explanation ready about needing it for her website's customer profiles, but the whole thing felt wrong and creepy. It all reached a breaking point when Jennifer asked me to meet her in person to discuss an exciting new project. Every instinct told me to cut off contact. This didn't feel like a normal client meeting to talk business. Still, part of me worried I was overreacting. After agonizing over the decision for a few days, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown during busy lunch hours, hoping a public place would be safe enough. I recognized Jennifer instantly from the photo on her website as she walked in right on time, but the smile and friendly handshake betrayed no sign of the invasive questioning from her emails. She sat down with a folder of paperwork and began explaining her new top-secret project, a contract for at least 6 months steady work. All I had to do was provide one more piece of information, my full bank account and routing number for direct deposit payments. Hearing that request, I finally snapped to my senses. This whole thing had been an elaborate scam to steal my identity and who knows what else. I abruptly stood up, told her I wasn't interested in her shady offer, and stormed out, ignoring her pleas to wait. My hands shook as the reality of the situation sunk in. I'd given sensitive personal information to a potential criminal, or worse, all in the desperate hope of making some extra cash. It was a chilling lesson in being less trusting of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. After cutting off contact, I took steps to protect myself, freezing my credit reports, monitoring my bank accounts, changing passwords. Weeks went by without any sign of identity theft, but I remained on high alert. The experience shook me to my core, making me feel exposed and violated. I avoided Craigslist altogether after that, ignoring any potential writing gigs no matter how lucrative they sounded. In retrospect, there were so many red flags I should have noticed earlier. The too good to be true pay rate, the invasive personal questions, the insistence on secrecy. But in my rush to earn income, I ignored my gut feeling that something was off. I learned the hard way to be more cautious and skeptical, especially when trusting strangers found online. While I fortunately avoided lasting harm, the unease lingered for months, a harsh reminder that predators often disguise themselves in sheep's clothing. They exploit desperation and greed to take advantage of others. This chilling brush with potential crime left me warier and less foolish when leaping at shady opportunities. Now I know to trust my instincts and walk away at the first sign things aren't what they seem. It's just not worth risking your safety and security. In the weeks after this incident, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, worrying Jennifer or an associate of hers would track me down. I jumped at every phone call from an unknown number, feeling violated whenever spam emails made it through my tightened security filters. It took time to regain a sense of normalcy and stop feeling like a victim awaiting the next strike. The psychological effects went deeper than I expected. I had trouble sleeping, obsessively checking locks and scanning crowds for potential threats. When my actual identity did get compromised in an unrelated online data breach, I completely unraveled, sure this was Jennifer's revenge. In my mind, she became an omnipresent villain lurking in every shadow. Gradually, the anxiety faded, but I was never quite the same carefree person. The world seemed filled with sinister dangers ready to exploit any misstep. It strained relationships as I became overprotective and closed off. I no longer posted personal information online or trusted those I met to be who they claimed. The violation of privacy and security stoked a lasting paranoia. I never imagined a simple Craigslist sale could go so horribly wrong. As a college student, I frequently buy and sell used furniture and household items on Craigslist to earn a little extra cash. It's usually pretty straightforward. Agree on a time and public place to meet, exchange cash for the item, and be on your way. But this particular experience still haunts me years later. I had an old IKEA bookshelf I was looking to get rid of, so I posted an ad on Craigslist with photos and my asking price of $50. A man promptly responded saying he was interested and could meet that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. He seemed normal enough in his messages, so I agreed and drove downtown with the bookshelf disassembled and loaded in my trunk. I parked on the street near the coffee shop and messaged to let him know I had arrived. A gruff-looking man in his 40s soon approached my car and introduced himself as the buyer. Without even looking at the shelf or exchanging pleasantries, he bluntly stated he would only pay $20 for it. I was taken aback by his abrupt, aggressive tone and told him the price was firm at $50 as stated in the ad. He then insisted he didn't have that much cash on him and demanded I allow him to take the shelf and pay me later over Venmo. I politely refused, saying I wouldn't hand anything over without being paid in full up front. As I stood my ground, he became increasingly angry and threatening. He accused me of false advertising and trying to rip him off. I tried to calmly diffuse the situation, but he wasn't having it. The man then forcibly grabbed one end of the bookshelf from my trunk as I struggled to hold on to the other end. We engaged in a brief tug of war until he overpowered me and ripped it out of my hands, causing me to stumble backwards. Before I could react, he quickly threw the disassembled shelf into the back of his pickup truck. Shell-shocked and shaken, I begged and pleaded for him to return it or at least pay me the agreed price. But he just snarled at me to get lost unless I went at worse trouble. I was alarmed by the wild look in his eyes, like he was fully capable of violence over a simple furniture dispute. With no clear options left, I reluctantly got back in my car and drove off, watching him speed away with my bookshelf in his truck. I felt an overwhelming sense of violation and fear. How could what I thought would be a safe, straightforward Craigslist transaction escalate into this nightmare? I kept replaying it in my mind, wondering if I could have done something to diffuse the situation before it turned hostile. But ultimately, I realized I was not to blame. This man was clearly unhinged and bent on intimidating me into complying with him no matter what. In the aftermath, I decided against trying to pursue legal action over a cheap piece of furniture. I just wanted to put the traumatic incident behind me and be thankful I didn't suffer any serious physical harm. But it shook my sense of security and made me wary of using Craigslist again. You really have no idea who you're dealing with or how quickly things can take a dangerous turn. Ever since, I've made a point to only meet buyers from Craigslist or similar sites in very public locations, and I bring someone with me for safety. I also trust my instincts. If someone seems aggressive or shady right off the bat, I won't hesitate to just walk away rather than risk further confrontation. But I'll never forget that harrowing experience over what should have been a simple transaction. The dark side of humanity revealed among the banality of an online used goods sale. Stay safe out there. Looking back now, I can see all the mistakes I made and warning signs I ignored in pursuit of making a quick $50. I went to meet a complete stranger based on a couple of perfunctory emails, without learning anything about him or taking basic precautions. I didn't let anyone know where I was going or make any backup plan if things went south. And I stood my ground against an increasingly angry and threatening man over a cheap piece of furniture, not worth jeopardizing my safety and pride over. My youth and inexperience surely played a role. As a broke college student, $50 felt like a lot of cash at the time, and I assumed the public meeting spot meant everything would be fine. I've since learned you can't count on bystanders to intervene or deter someone determined to get their way through intimidation. Maybe if I'd had shown up a large male friend, just having that imposing physical presence as backup could have changed the dynamics before tensions escalated. For a while afterwards, I found myself feeling jumpy and anxious whenever meeting other strangers for online sales. It really damaged my sense of trust in people, thinking anyone could turn on you in an instant. I had to work through those feelings and not let one bad experience make me paranoid or overly suspicious. Not everyone is out to scam or intimidate. Most online buyers and sellers just want a fair deal on used goods. I eventually regained my confidence in meeting up for transactions after taking more precautions. The main thing I want others to learn from my unsettling experience is this: be smart and stay safe. Trust your gut if someone seems off or you get a bad vibe. Make a plan if things go wrong. And don't put money or material items above your personal safety when dealing with strangers. If needed, bring someone with you or meet in a police station parking lot. A cheap bookshelf or piece of furniture just isn't worth getting assaulted over. Looking back, I'm relieved I avoided serious injury and try to use it as a cautionary tale. Stay vigilant out there. You never know who's on the other end of that online response. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.